I'm Paul Astle, Director of the Networking People, or TMP. Just before I start, a quick show of hands, check people can hear me at the back. Who in the room today is representing a business? Okay, and of the people with their hands up, keep your hands up please, thank you. Who is considering or has a formal cybersecurity accreditation such as 27001? Okay, and of the people left who actually has an accreditation such as that? Okay, so hopefully this will be of interest to some people in the room. So I'm going to talk about cybersecurity and how we see it as a real enabler for the growth of our company. So just a little bit about TMP. It's probably unlikely you've heard of us unless you're a resident at InfoLab 21. We were established about 2 years ago. We came out the back of a successful company, Lancaster University Network Services. It was a management buyout of their infrastructure. We provide high-speed consultancy and connectivity to businesses and public sector. We're relatively small right now with 7 staff. We've doubled our headcount in the last 12 months, so we have a strategy of rapid growth. And predominantly our public sector customers are in the local area, so Blackpool Council, Blackburn and Darwin. We've also got some fairly further afield, Stirling Council and the Shetland Islands of all places. So a little bit about me. I'm a director of TMP. I've got 12 years experience in the IT industry, starting up from desktop support through to network engineer, project management, program management, and now where I am today. Been a small company. I'm also the operations manager, the CIRO, the quality manager, the project manager, program cleaner up or washer up or whatever is required to run the company. And very clear, I've no formal qualifications or expertise in cybersecurity, so what I'm presenting today is just my own findings. So looking at our strategy for growth, the government roughly spent, according to some figures I pulled off gov.uk, £657 billion of public money last year. The government are also committed to spread the wealth across a much diverse range of companies, and specifically to put 25% of that through SMEs. Now that's not necessarily directly, but through the supply chain. At the moment, the bulk of our IT spend, especially if you look at Whitehall, goes to HP, BT, Capgemini, Capita. There is a staggering factor, which I can't remember off the top of my head, that I think every man, woman and child in the UK pays something like £23 a year to HP. That's kind of the size of the market they have. And it's very hard to calculate the actual total spend because it's woven through departmental budgets. But if we assumed only 1% was spent on IT, and of that 25% went to SMEs, then you're talking at 1.6 billion, which is a pretty substantial figure. So to us, the strategic importance of this is that 70% of our business is public sector. Within the public sector, there's a massive overhaul in the way that they look at their own cybersecurity. Things like COCO have been replaced with PSN, and public bodies now, no matter what sector they're in or what size they are, having to look very closely at their own supply chains, and part of that will be offsetting the risk by looking at their suppliers' formal accreditations. So what we hope to do by gaining such accreditations is provide confidence to our customers that ultimately, as a communication provider, we are providing their critical infrastructure. So if our network fell over, the residents of Blackpool wouldn't be able to get any of their benefits, pensions. It's staggering. The traffic signals, registering deaths, births, everything goes via the internet. You say Internet of Things, our lives depend on that, at least from a public sector point of view. But there are a lot of barriers to implementing this, otherwise everybody in the room would have put their hand up and kept it up. First and foremost, it's very time consuming. This isn't a quick process, and as a small business, it goes directly against places where you'd like to focus your energy and money, namely growing your business, getting more customers, making more money. Cybersecurity in its essence is, at least in the short term, won't assist that. It involves heavy involvement from senior management, so that's a pro and a con. If you're a small business, it's actually can be helpful because it's likely that you are the senior manager, you are the director or the MD, so if you need to make a decision, you just make it. The actual process of being audited can be expensive as well. And what I personally found is there's quite a shortage of any self-help resources. Most of what you probably do as a small business, you don't first of all go to Yellow Pages and get a consultant in. You'll look towards your own sort of network of knowledge or online resources, basically free resources. And as I said, it is very hard to measure return on investment initially because it's unlikely to have an immediate return on investment. That said, there are a number of positives. The actual process we found is highly prescribed. Now, that the less ambiguity you have, the easier it is to follow a process and see it through to its conclusion. It's the main reason why we're doing it is to reduce barriers to procurement. A lot of procurements now for public sector customers that we're involved in will ask to see your ISMS or your 27001 certificate. If you can just give them a certificate, that's a box ticked, you can move on to the next step in the procurement. It's internationally recognised, so if you're doing work overseas, then you're not having to gain a different qualification. For us as well, which I'll cover in a minute, it's the first step on the road to public sector networks, PSN. So it's a mandatory requirement for that. And ultimately, let's not forget, it will make your business more secure. Implemented properly, you can still remain agile, but you will take a very deep look at the way that you do business, the way you store your data. Things like backups, really good example. I'd imagine most people in the room do some kind of regular backup of their data, but how confident are you that if you actually had a loss of data, could you recover it? Do you do restores on a regular basis? We do, but nowhere near in the kind of auditable requirement that would be needed for the standard. One thing to mention, just a little footnote, if you are going through accreditation, there's a lot of companies out there, and again, I'm not an expert, but they need to be, well, it's recommended they're registered with UCAS, so it's a professional body which registers the people that audit you. You can get some cheap auditors in that will pass you for just the sake of paying the fee to them. But if they're not UCAS, that paper might not be worth anything. So our journey so far, I've got two tracks there. There's the 27001 and the PSN. I'm going to cover mainly 27001. So we conducted a lot of research, appointed our accreditation body. We went with BSI because we've already attained 9001. So we just continued with the same accreditation body. We cheated slightly and we bought a toolkit. Probably the best thing we did. It was a real springboard, and there's a link at the end of this presentation just to where we got ours from. I'm sure there's lots available. And you find at the very beginning you're just lost by terminology and the process, and it's not clear when you buy 27001 and 27002 manual. It doesn't say, okay, step one, this is what you do. It's just a bunch of clauses, and it's very difficult to distill that into physical actions. We paid for just a day's gap analysis just to check that we're on the right track before we went any further. And actually our audit is due this Thursday, so I personally spent all weekend working on our ISMS, which is pretty much at first draft, couple more late evenings, and I think we're where we need to be with it. What does this actually mean in reality? Well, for us, first and foremost, we have a firewall on our network, but our risk assessments show that it's not adequate. Luckily, we're a part of our product line is firewalls and filtering, so we can put such a thing in without a huge expense. It is not somewhere which, as a bunch of IT capable people, we thought we'd have to put a web filter on, but again, everything you do has to be risk assessed, and you'll see what comes out of that. Backups, we do backups, they're backed up to the cloud, but are they fit for purpose? Do we test it on a regular basis? Do we have the requisite contracts with our cloud provider? there's been a lot of talk today, and it's very, very valid, about as more and more services move to the cloud, it's going to become a serious headache for anyone implementing cybersecurity, because quite often either contracts you get from your upstream suppliers aren't in such a format that you can easily see where you stand if there's a failure. Do you really know what's happening under the hood of their services? I mean, we tend to gravitate towards Google and Microsoft, crash plan, big name companies, but then they're subject to massive failures as well, so it doesn't necessarily make them secure because of the size. Physical security, Helen sat in the room. Helen works on the team over in InfoLab that provide our accommodation, and we've been bugging her for exact details of our contracts and the cleaners, are they CRB checked, who exactly has a key to our office, etc., etc. Depending on the risk of the data you handle within your office, your actual accommodation you're in might not be fit for purpose anymore, or might not be able to be retrofitted. Encrypting all devices that leave our office, it is something we're quite lax at. Not all our laptops are encrypted. What happens if one's stolen? And mainly is a policy for absolutely everything. So everything you do in your business, you remember that auditor's going to come in and say, prove it. You know you do it, but it needs to be written down. If it's not written down and your staff haven't read that policy and understood it and signed something to say they've understood it, then you essentially don't do it from the auditor's point of view. So we're part of this now. Once we get our ISMS signed off, we're going to go for a big training process with our employees. Luckily, as a company of 7 people, that's not a particularly difficult task. And every single asset in your business needs to be risk assessed. And we're trying to follow the government's process of looking at every single asset in terms of its confidentiality, integrity and availability, and looking at a whole host of threats and seeing what effect it would have on those 3 factors. Now, something which quite often is overlooked is this just isn't something you do once. Once you're committed to formally or even informally implementing cybersecurity, it has to be ingrained in day-to-day business. If it's not, when you get re-audited, you'll fail because you won't have your audits, you won't have your regular risk assessments, you won't have any proof that you're continuing with this. Anyone who's done 9001 or any similar ISO will be familiar with PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's just a terminology for making sure that you constantly review your policies, you constantly improve them, you feed in all the various legislative changes, threats to your business. You know, day to day, what's attacking us today won't be attacking us tomorrow. What's a threat today won't be a threat tomorrow. You've obviously the cost of your yearly surveillance visits and the management costs associated with that. And if you're a small business, this is all going to be on top of keeping the lights on, bringing money in. When you've got a client screaming at you that they need a piece of work doing that they're paying you for, it's very hard to find time to actually do something which isn't bringing any money in. Lastly, as I said before, we've already implemented 9001, so if anyone in the room has already gone through that, then that does help greatly. A lot of the controls in 27001 are aligned, so your document control process, your audit process, your management reviews, there's a lot of similarities and you can reuse a lot of that. And you'll also be familiar with just the process of walking through the standard and what the actual accreditation itself is very similar. It's split into stages. It's just slightly longer because anywhere where you have physical infrastructure that your business is reliant on or data is processed at has to come into scope for 27001. So they may have to visit data centres, they may have to visit branch offices, etc. So lastly, there's just a couple of resources there. These are my own personal resources. There's plenty of people stood in the corridor out there that know far more about this subject than I do, and probably have far more useful resources but that's where we've gone for some of the information. And there's the link to UCAS. So if you are looking at starting, that'll list the registered bodies which they would recommend to undertake your accreditation. Thanks very much.